Okay. Can you hear me?
I can now.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. All right. I don't know what it is, but it looked like you was muted, but we'll start it. We'll start again. Did you get the introduction? We'll start all over
No, I
again.
didn't hear anything. It sounds
Oh, okay.
as if you weren't there.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, we're here now. So let me start again. All right. Sister Reach, sorry for those technical difficulties, but we are here now. And so, welcome again to Sister Reach's monthly social justice preacher series. I am Elder Victor Hanna, Faith and Education Outreach Coordinator at Sister Reach. Sister Reach is a grassroots 501c3 reproductive justice organization founded by Cherie Scott in 2011 in Memphis, Tennessee. Sister Reach supports the reproductive autonomy of women and teens of color, poor and rural women, LGBTQIA plus people and their families through the framework of reproductive justice. Sister Reach's mission is to empower our base to lead healthy lives, raise healthy families, and live in healthy and sustainable communities. This is achieved through working by a four-pronged strategy: education, policy and advocacy, cultural shift, and harm reduction locally, nationally, and internationally. Today, our guest is Pastor Willie Dwayne Francois III. Pastor Francois serves as senior pastor of Fountain Baptist Church in Summit, New Jersey, president of the Black Church Center for Justice and Equality, a national think tank and policy advocacy organization. At New York Theological Seminary, he is director of the Master of Professional Studies program at Sing Sing and Bedford Hills Correctional Facilities, as well as the associate professor of liberation theology. He is also an author of Silencing White Noise: Six Practices to Overcome Our Inaction on Race. Please help me welcome our social justice preacher series guest for February 2004, Pastor Willie Dwayne Francois III. So glad to have you, sir.
Thank you so much, Elder Hannah, and to the Sister Reach community. Excited to be here and share uh, in this social justice preaching series. Excited about being able to do that in the month of February this month. That has been budgeted as a time for us to think about Black history, as we think about Black presence and securing Black futures and the ways that we one day hope to contribute to the future, so much so that we will be Black history as individuals and as each of us. Today, I want to spend the moments that have been dedicated to me thinking about voting, thinking about voting as a spiritual practice, voting as a moral force, and voting as an opportunity for us to make democracy real. I know that the ideas that I was asked to speak about were around the importance of voting, primarily as a multi-faith community. How do we make decisions from positions of faith with a multi-faith interreligious framework for doing that work? And so in honoring that, I want to amend the subtitle of our engagement today, thinking about fulfilling the promise of the multi-faith, multiracial democracy. When I think about America, I think about it as a project that is undone, a project that is yet to be fulfilled, a project that is built on stolen land and stolen labor, land stolen from indigenous Americans and labor stolen from people that were literally ripped off the western shores of Africa, dropped on the eastern shores of the United States, sold up and down, and primarily built the wealth of this country, and to a great degree has built the political power of this country. So I think about America in those words of Langston Hughes. America ain't ever been America to me because of the way America has not functioned as the multiracial democracy that it has promised. And so when talking about the importance of voting, it is also talking about the need for a country to grant or to fulfill its promise to all of its citizens of how it can embrace and honor and own representation from those various pockets of difference that exist in our country. I'll say it again, America is a nation that is not really a democracy. It is a nation that has functioned more like a kleptocracy. Democracies are nations that are guided by the will of the people, all the people, but a kleptocracy is a nation that is driven by the greed and by the hubris of the few. In fact, it is a kleptocracy because it is a nation of theft. Stolen land, stolen labor has built this nation. And if it is a country that is built on stolen land and stolen labor, it should not be a surprise to us that gentrification happens in places like Harlem and that mass incarceration happens in places like Atlanta and Chicago and in Louisiana, because it is a nation that is built on theft. Its greatness is connected to its capacity to steal. And maybe this is why James Baldwin's words were so significant when he says words like freedom, justice, and democracy are not common concepts. On the contrary, they are rare. People are not born knowing what these words are. And that gives us this foundational dilemma, this subterranean crisis that denies America, not denies simply in America the right of certain people to vote, but America is literally and actively denying its own fulfillment because, in the words of Dr. King, it has not been true to what it says it is on paper. And so this is a moment in the year 2024 where we are facing the most grave electoral crisis of my lifetime, the most grave electoral crisis possibly since the year that Nixon was ousted out of office. We are living in a crisis of democracy. And if we are going to be clear as we ask questions about Black turnout, we ask questions about faith-based turnout, what we know for sure is that there are many reasons why people do not vote. It is understandable the reasons why people sit on their hands and stall their feet on election day, because so many of us are living with what I call democratic grief, that the process has been so unrewarding, unfulfilling, and so oppressive and obstructionist that most of us do not feel as if our votes actually contribute to the advancement of justice, whether that is racial justice, economic justice, gender justice, sexuality justice, and we can run the lines of all the justices that matter, because justice is indivisible. And we have to think about our role in democracy as an intersectional engagement, that we do not have the luxury of just voting for racial justice, because all forms of social domination are interlocking forms of domination. It would be one thing if racism functioned by itself, but racism functions alongside sexism, which functions alongside heteronormativity and alongside queer antagonism, which functions alongside capitalism, which functions alongside xenophobia, which functions alongside a range of other forms of systemic domination that cause us to question whether or not America is possible and whether or not democracy is worth participating in. These are the reasons that many of us live with democratic grief, this belief that the process is either broken or it is designed to function in a way that breaks other person's dreams and other people's possibilities. Either the system is broken or is designed to break people. And that gives us this sense of democratic grief. When people do not go to the polls, we often call it apathy. We often call it disengagement. We often call it irresponsibility, but we've not been able to diagnose it as democratic grief. There's there's something about the process that we are mourning, something about the process that we are bemoaning, something about the process that leaves us bereaved, because from generation to generation to generation, we have been taught that America is a self-realizing prophecy of justice and equity. We have been taught that the promise of America is real, and the more that we have assimilated into the American project, the less we have seen delivery of justice on behalf of those who live under interlocking, intersectional forms of oppression, which includes Black women, Black men, and Black children. Democratic grief is the reason why I believe that we are poised to re-elect a person who is a fascist, who is an autocrat. We are on track to re-elect a person who is undemocratic, ademocratic, anti-democratic. And this is the mood of America. I often want us to be clear that January 6th was not just a moment that happened on the steps of the Capitol. January 6th is a mood that lives in pockets of this country that is constantly metastasizing, eating at what we have left of a democracy. And we must be clear on whether or not we are going to allow January 6th to stall where it is, or whether we are going to allow it to move forward and perpetuate unabated and unaddressed. Democratic grief is one of the reasons why I chose to present on and to lecture on this topic, because we have not rightly diagnosed why only half of our country is actually showing up at the polls. We've not fully diagnosed why we are bemoaning over and lamenting over and over again why certain folk are not going to the polls, and we say it as if they are working against their interests. But what if it is not apathy? What if it is not irresponsibility? What if it is not a sense of political illiteracy? What if it is the sickness of democratic grief that we, as those who are engaged, we as a multiracial, multi-faith community, multiracial, multi-faith democracy, must be a part of the healing of this country? I say this all the time, that Black people, particularly Black church women, have always been the first responders of American democracy, what I call democratic first responders. When democracy flatlines, it has always been Black women who have gone to the polls and saved this country. That is the legacy that we live in as Black people and as Black men. We are beneficiaries of Black women who have decided to be democratic first responders and have consistently saved this democracy from itself. We can run the list of the times Black women have come and outvoted every other demographic in this country. And when they have voted for children, they have voted for their own rights, they have voted for health care, they have voted for less carceral engagement, because Black women, for some reason, have understood themselves, have positioned themselves, comported themselves as democratic first responders. And maybe this is the election where we have to be willing, those of us who are not Black women, to take some of the democratic burden off of them and actually fight for them instead of them always fighting for us. Democratic grief is something we must engage. Why is this democratic grief? From George Floyd to Breonna Taylor, democratic grief from children being put in cages on the southern border, democratic grief from the right to vote being denied from state to state. We're in the state of Georgia. You cannot even pass out water to people who are standing online because there is an organized conspiracy to keep America white and to keep America male. And our democratic grief is real, but it is betraying us if we do not find ways to heal from it. That's why I use the language of grief, because grief is something we can heal from if we face it. Grief is something we can heal from if we reinvest in life and in the present. Grief is something we can heal from if we understand that it is not irresponsibility, it is not political illiteracy, it is not apathy, but it is a woundedness that has the capacity to be healed if we're willing to show up and fight the good fight of small d democratic values. We in this country, built on stolen land and stolen labor, it is a country that we my ancestors, many of your ancestors lived under 10 generations of race-based slavery. Think about that. That in the history of this country, there were 10 generations of race-based slavery, no right to vote. 6 generations of so-called freedom, no right to vote. Only 2 generations in this country have had the right to vote. 2 generations of Black folk in this country have had the right to vote. A multiracial democracy, which America claims to be, has only been in existence since 1965, if we believe that the Voting Rights Act of that year had significant consequences. But although the last 2 generations have had the right to vote, in 2013, that right to vote was gutted when Shelby versus Holder was decided in the Supreme Court, which decided states can now institute and inflict what kind of laws of harm they want to inflict. We must practice voting and political engagement, because democracies do not die simply because of dictators and rogue militaries. Democracies can die in our sight, and we are not even aware of it. How do they do this? 3 ways democracies die, which is why we must go to the polls with a multiracial, multi-faith agenda, because democracies die when the referees are captured. That's an image that Stephen Levinsky gives in the book, How Democracies Die. When they capture the referees, when the courts have been stacked to push forward political agendas. Doesn't that sound familiar? These are symptoms that have happened all over the world. When the courts are no longer able to call balls and strikes, when the courts are no longer able to interpret the rules in the most objective way, but are now interpreting the rules in the most partisan way. When something goes to court, you automatically know how it's going to be decided. That is a capturing of the referees. If we do not have an independent judiciary, if we do not have independent courts from the Supreme Court down to the local court, then we have nobody to make sure the game is being played fairly. Sidelining the other side. This is when we don't simply disagree with our opponents, but we actually see our opponents as the enemies, and we do everything we can to destroy their character and to destroy their integrity. When we chant "lock them up" at political rallies, that is sidelining the other side. When we say things like we will use our Justice Department in order to prosecute and incarcerate our political opponents, that is sidelining the other side. When you can be a presidential candidate who's a former president and can say you will be a dictator for a day and use your Justice Department to send the sitting president and his administration to prison, that is sidelining the other side. When you rewrite the rules of the game, when you decide who can vote and who can vote, and you begin to and can't vote, and you begin to shrink the number of people who participate in the democracy, you are rewriting the rules of the game. My friends, we are clear that capturing the referees is happening in America. Sidelining the other side is happening in America. They are rewriting the rules in our very eyes, because not only are they rewriting who can vote, now they're rewriting what we can read. They are rewriting the rules for us, which is why this is a year we have to vote in ways that overwhelm the forces of oppression and the forces of domination. That if this is very clear, because now we are seeing more and more gerrymandering. What I call politicians are now electing their voters instead of voters electing their politicians. I'll say that again. Gerrymandering, that's when you create districts that favor one political party over another political party. Gerrymandering is happening all over the country, where they are redrawing lines, where they are concentrating certain people in certain voting areas and diluting the power of other people in other voting areas. Gerrymandering is real. It's living right alongside voter suppression. They are rewriting the rules. Instead of politicians being elected by their voters, politicians are electing their voters, which is why we have to figure out how to push back against the grief. But Howard Thurman says, every citizen in our society, theoretically, at any rate, has the ballot. The ballot represents one valuable point of attack upon the impersonal forces summarized as the state. Central, therefore, to the individual's social witness is the exercise of the ballot. If a person regards her obligation to use the ballot as an expression of the central commitment of her life, then she will bring to bear upon this function the most comprehensive knowledge and wisdom which she possesses. This Thurman is telling us that we must see the right to vote as an opportunity to attack the impersonal social forces that are the state, that every vote we cast is a type of prayer. Every vote we cast is an opportunity to demand and petition for a new way and a new world. Every vote we cast is our attack on a system that is dehumanizing us, a system that is negating our value, a system that wants to lock us or return us to a chattel arrangement. Isn't it interesting that we live in a country that went from calling Black folk chattel to now calling Black folk criminal, and the result is the same. You do not have the right to vote when you are chattel, and you do not have the right to vote if you are a so-called criminal. It is the logic of America that does not want us to know the spiritual vitality of the ballot, because the individual practices her responsibility for the state, and it is because the vote has a civic character and, according to Thurman, a religious character, that we vote as a form of prayer. It is what I heard one writer say years ago: voting is a type of civic sacrament. It is our most accessible and most recognized way of achieving the country that we deserve and not the country that we have. How do we do this from an interfaith perspective? We do it by grounding ourselves in a spirituality that is earthly, but also transcendent. I like that. It is what one writer calls transimmanent. That the right to vote is what I'm calling a transimmanent practice. It is both transcendent and earthly at the same time. It is earthly because it engages the forces of hell that exist here, but it is transcendent because it pushes us beyond our boundaries and beyond the myopic ways that we see the world. This is why I am calling the right to vote and the practice of voting a spiritual practice. And we need the type of spirituality that helps us reposition our gaze so we can disrupt and we can reconstruct. That is what the vote offers us. If we see it as a part of our spirituality, it allows us to reposition our gaze. We see the world differently, not from beneath. We allow ourselves to see the world from beneath, from below. We see the world from the posture of those who are most vulnerable, those, which I'll say in a minute, who are unprotected, and it gives us the wherewithal to be disruptive and reconstructive at the same time. What is at stake? In 2024, on November 5th, we will be voting for a president and a vice president, 11 governors. We will have 35 U.S. Senate seats, all 435 U.S. House seats, 169 state legislators, 2,200 prosecutors and sheriffs, thousands of school board members. This is what's at stake this election cycle. We think that this is about Biden and Trump, but honestly, as dangerous as the one presidential candidate, I'm sorry, there are no nominees yet. What one presidential candidate represents, that there is so much more to our democracy that impacts our kitchen table, more than who the president is. What happens in our kitchen table and in our bank account is determined by governors and state legislators, and also by who's in the House of Representatives, and by school boards, and by our local and county prosecutors and public safety officers. That when we are talking about the 2024 election, we are talking also about what's happening in our state houses, what's happening in our courtrooms, and what's happening in our school board meetings. And that is the kind of work that we must take. But this, in order for us to engage this, to attack this, we must have the type of spirituality that allows us to see beyond the mess and the corrosive drama and crisis of lovelessness that is our democracy. We need a spirituality grounded in social justice. This is why I'm excited that Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, and conscientious atheism all have a commitment to social justice. Social justice is the guarantee of human equality, sustainability, and dignity through the redistribution of material resources and the dismantling of oppressive structures. In order for us to have social justice, we have to guarantee sustainability, equality, and dignity, and we have to do that by the redistribution of resources and power. This is why I am calling us across our religious lines to a spirituality that is anchored in love. What I am saying should be public love. Not private sentimentality, not personal affection, not individual relationships, but public love, a love that is seen as a form of power that can attack the very impersonal social forces that we call the state in nonviolent ways, right? Dr. King says that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. Bell Hooks said, the moment we choose to love, we begin to move against domination, against oppression. The moment we choose to love, we begin to move towards freedom, to act in ways that liberate ourselves and others. That action is the testimony of love as the practice of freedom. Cornel West says justice is what love looks like in public, like tenderness is what love looks like in private. Public love is what we need in this 2024 election. It is the embodiment, creation of, and advocacy for common goodness, equity, and justice that unmasks and undoes truths about the compounding complexities of incessant inhumanity, iniquitous inequality, and injurious injustices. We need a type of love, what I call public love, that sees and responds to life as if all of our destinies are tied into a radical mutuality. We need, some people think that love does not belong in public. No, public is exactly what needs love when we live in this crisis of lovelessness, or when Black girls are suspended at 4 times the rate of white girls. That's because of lovelessness. When in states like New Jersey, if you're a Black man, you are 12 times more likely to be incarcerated than a white man. That is a crisis of lovelessness. When you have mothers who are unable to receive public benefits because their sons have been incarcerated and come home and have nowhere else to lay their head but on their mother's couch or mother's guest room, and they are not able to, that is a form of lovelessness in the state. And how you attack lovelessness is not by more hate, but you attack lovelessness by a militant type of love. What I think is public love, and this exists across all of our religious traditions. We need to elect candidates who lead with love, right? Candidates who don't just have thoughts and prayers when children are shot in schools, but candidates who have public love, who use their pen and their voices to legislate guns out of access and out of circulation. Because we cannot succumb to the witness of Christian whiteness. And to be clear, Christian whiteness does not just live in white churches. There are too many pulpits that sound white. There are too many black pulpits that sound white. Too many black churches that sound white. Too many black Sunday school rooms that sound white. And we have this opportunity as a multiracial, multi-faith democracy to exercise the demon of Christian whiteness. And again, when I talk about Christian whiteness, it is not about white people, because whiteness is not about skin color. Whiteness is not about ancestry. Whiteness is a logic. It is a form of power that is working beneath the surface that can use and recruit any of us. This is why the Methodist Church, the Methodist Church, the Baptist Church, and the Presbyterian Church split over the issue of slavery 15 years before the country split over the issue of slavery, because whiteness is not just about personality. Whiteness is a form of corrosive logic, ideology, power that is working beneath the surface. And this is our opportunity to say that is not the kind of faith we practice. Whiteness can infect Buddhism. Whiteness can infect Islam. Whiteness can infect Christianity, as we see on a daily basis. Whiteness can infect Judaism. And we have to be able to exercise the demon, the ideology, the logic, the power of whiteness out of our faith traditions when we make decisions on who we want to lead and represent us in our halls of power. And this, I'm calling us to an abolitionist spirituality. I'm calling us to a political spirituality. I say in my book, Silencing White Noise, the political without the spiritual is predatory and loveless. And the spiritual without the political is passive and unproductive. We need a abolitionist spirituality. We need a way of engaging the world that is fundamentally committed to the love of all flesh, the freedom of all flesh, and the dismantling and changing of systems of disinheritance and structural sin. How do we do this from an interfaith perspective? And I'm done on this one. How do we do this from an interfaith, multi-religious perspective? Is one, we have to vote with a spirituality that says, I'm on the side of the unprotected every single day. We must do this from a perspective that says, I have a sacred intolerance to the iniquity of inequity. When we go to the polls, we have to be willing to say that injustice is not just unfair. Injustice is sin. That's the big word in theology that we use. We must be able to say mass incarceration is sin. Undereducation is sin. Underemployment is sin. The racial wealth gap being 11 times more for whites than it is for black people is sin. We must go to the polls with a sacred intolerance to the iniquity of inequity. We must go to the polls believing that we can heal the harms that have been done to the minds and bodies of violated people. If they can legislate systemic harm, then they ought to be able to legislate systemic love. And when we go to the polls, we go to the polls believing that reparation, repair can happen with our vote. We also go to the polls knowing that the America we have always known does not have to be the America we continue to know. Every time we need a spirituality that is committed to a daily renewal of counter imagination and counter action. How do we elect leaders that we deserve from a multi-faith perspective, we need a spirituality that is grounded in love, that chooses the unprotected, that understands that injustice is sin, that calls for a counter imagination and new action, and also a form of spirituality that says that my role as a small d Democrat does not stop with my vote, but we must figure out how to create a culture of accountability so that people that we vote for are accountable to us between elections and not just on election cycles. We can achieve this because America has always found ways. When its most oppressed folk have risen up and demanded that they be heard, demanded that they be seen, and demanded that justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Ashe and Amen.
Yes, sir. You have absolutely given us a lot to chew on. Thank you so much for your presentation. You opened up with, man, where do I start? You opened up with a quote by Langston Hughes, which, I want to kind of talk about just a little bit. Um, uh, in one of his poems, he also describes his disillusionment with the American dream and suggests that the United States has failed to fulfill its promise of freedom and equality for all people. And so when we're talking about, voting for, the fulfilling the promise of the multi-faith and the multiracial democracy, you say that it has been left undone. It has been left unfulfilled, and as a result of that, I do see, a lot of us have questions. Okay, so if has been the plight of the United States, and we're caught up in that system, um, how again can our voting practice penetrate that system in a way that we can see the benefits of it?
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, that brother Langston Hughes says, "Make America America again," right? Not make America great again, but make America America again. Here's how we do it. Let me say these three things about how we feel the efficacy of our voting. One is that we actually engage on the local level. Because it's the local level that actually has the greatest impact on your pocketbook, on your kitchen table, and so many other dimensions of your household and your work life. We see the greatest movement of our votes by who we send to City Hall, who we send to school boards, and who we send to who we send to the State House, right? Part of what we have to do if we want to start seeing, and not just start seeing, if we want to reinvigorate what our vote means, is to start overperforming our votes on the local level. That's number one. Number two, I would say, is that we cannot become pawns in a two-party system. I'll leave it there because that is you can get in trouble right there, right? We cannot become pawns to a two-party system, because even if we know that one party is overtly antagonistic to our needs, and then you have another party that is at least vocally committed to our needs but cannot materialize those, then you have to figure out, where do we find political home? Right. And even if I vote Republican or Democratic, that does not mean that has to be my political home. Right. I believe, and maybe I'm my male bias gets in the way. Sometimes I'm clear on that too. I'm constantly working on my male privilege. But I believe Black churches are some of the greatest spaces for Black political activity and the Black political home. Now we have to exercise our own demons of queer antagonism and of patriarchy and of classism. But there is still no other unified is not right. There's still no other social force in this country other than Black churches that have done the kind of work that we need. And I was a Black Lives Matter charter member in Atlantic City. I had a lot of hope for the Black Lives Matter movement. But still to this day, the Black churches are still our vehicles that we must reclaim, retool, revive in order to achieve what it means to have a political home, because Black folk can't find political home in parties that are driven by white money. That's that. And the third thing I would say, if we want to feel that value of our vote and make America America again, is that we have to practice what's called co-governance. That we as the people are the fourth branch of government. There's the legislative, there's the judicial, there's the executive. We always talk about three branches of government. No, there's a fourth branch of government, and it's called we the people. And the we the people branch of government has to know how to create a culture of co-governance, which means after we send folk to City Hall, to the White House, to Congress, then we have to make sure that they are always hearing from us. What often happens during the electoral process is we send people to Congress and they don't hear from us anymore. We send people to the White House and we don't make any demands on them. Part of what we have to do is develop that culture of co-governance so that we make our elections matter more by what we do in between elections.
I'm in between like 8 questions, but I know we're doing 3. So let me jump to your quote, which was really a definition of your definition of social justice. And I want to kind of intertwine that with faith leaders, right? You say social justice is the guarantee of human equality, sustainability, and dignity through the redistribution of material resources and the dismantling of hegemonic, said it for me.
Hegemonic.
Structure. Yes. And so my question is this, because we're talking about interfaith, we're talking about multi-faith, interfaith, multiracial. So how do we, especially in those faith arenas, not just Christianity, but most faith arenas have a foundational um, statutes or things that they govern or live by that may hit against what we feel like is social justice norms or things that are important to social justice. But um, you talked about being a civic sacrament, right? And that we are to defend those who need to be defended,
Sure.
right? So can you speak to how leaders can reposition, even if it's a topic or a situation that may not be under their religious standard, but if somebody is left unprotected, what should our position be? Because I feel like if we can address those of the church or the faith organizations can reposition ourselves, the great running away that we've experienced, especially over the last 3-4 years during the pandemic, we may see some of those things return because they will feel like what is important to them is important to us also. I know
Yeah.
that's a loaded question, but
No, it's a very loaded question, and I don't pretend to have the answer to it. What I will say is that there is no faith tradition that I can name. There is no moral tradition that I can name, including conscientious atheism, that does not place a premium on caring for the vulnerable and the unprotected. Whether I'm reading the Gitas, whether I'm reading the Quran, whether I am, holding on the sutras, whether I am reading the New Testament, right, the Second Testament. There is an overabundance of commitment to our duty to one another, our duty to invest ourselves into the flourishing, these my words, not biblical words, the flourishing, the wholeness, the security, the sustainability of other people who are not us. There is no faith tradition that does not commit to the not like me. That is a cardinal value, to be committed to the not quite me, the not me, right? And we have to figure out, how do we center those as rallying ideals for us to organize around. Right? Just yesterday, I had a meeting at the White House, and it was a meeting about a ceasefire, right? And which is not as controversial as Biden is making it seem. The majority of the country is invested in a ceasefire, right? Temporary or permanent, a ceasefire is not a hard idea. Why? Because there is something about all of our faith traditions and core to who we are as humans that understands that violence against vulnerable peoples is immoral. And so we were able to have rabbis, Christian leaders, Hindu devotees. Who else was in that room? Palestinian Christians and American Muslims who were able to form a coalition and demand from President Biden, although we don't practice the same religion, we don't worship the same ways, even though many of those religious traditions do worship the same God. We don't worship the same. We don't have the same sacred texts. We may not all agree about the relationship between Hamas and Palestine and the Palestinians and the Israelis and Benjamin Netanyahu. We may not agree on the complexities of all of those relationships, but we all were able to find common commitment to the salvation of life itself, right? The preservation of life. Right. And that is the kind of work we as faith leaders have to do, is that sometimes we have to be willing to honor the tension of our faith traditions, because in no way am I saying that we need to all only focus on what we agree in common. No, that is in some ways to deny the richness of someone's faith tradition. That for me to deny the richness of Buddhism, is what happens when I say, well, let's just focus on the fact that we find ways to think about suffering on the same levels. No, we have to be willing to say there's something rich and true about your tradition. There's something rich and true about my tradition, and we can hold that tension, because it's in that tension that we find the beauty of each other's tradition. But in terms of a commitment to humanity, we can organize around those places where we agree, right? We see each other for our differences. We value our differences, but we work together on our commonality. And I think that's the way we shift from the way interfaith community has been done in the past, where we only talk about what we have in common and we act like our differences don't exist. No, how about we learn from our differences with each other, but we act on our similarities. We act on our points of contact. And I think that's how we build a multiracial democracy that says we should not have another George Floyd. We should not have another Breonna Taylor. We should not have another Gaza. We should not have another Watts. We should not have another 9/11. But the way we do that is by learning from our differences and then acting upon our similarities.
Right. I think, um, you know, many years ago, I was going to school for music, and one of the classes that was offered was music appreciation. In other words, it gave you, regardless of what genre you was in, for me, it was classical music at the time, opera, but it gave you a spectrum of different music uh, foundations, right, for you to be able to pull from and be able to appreciate. And I think that our faith traditions, whatever they are, should create something that will help us be able to appreciate each other a little bit more in those areas and find those areas of commonplace. You, in our last question, you so gracefully and wonderfully talked about the various generations of where slavery was there, but there was no opportunity to vote. 6 generations of freedom, but no opportunity to vote. We've been in 2 generations where we've had the quote unquote right to vote. So
Mhm.
many people have sacrificed their lives, their family, financial their finances for us to have today the right to vote. And I agree. I love your description. What it was it democratic grief that we're in. Can you take a moment in closing words that can help us? And you talked about us being part of the healing process of this democratic grief process, because we know that the vote, our vote, the women's vote, the Black people vote,
Yeah.
the those that are in faith, um, could make a considerable impact if we would to band together, or at least practice what we have, the rights that we've been given. Can you speak to encouraging us to either get healing so that we can practice our vote, or how do we move past that even while we're not yet healed or whole? How we can move past that and make the impact that is necessary in this time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this time together and for these questions and for inviting me to the platform. I want to say that democratic grief it's as complex as all other forms of
Mhm.
grief.
Sure.
And sometimes you have to trust yourself to make your way through the cycle of those griefs, right? And I'm working on another book where I think I really need to pay some attention to, like, how do we heal from democratic grief? Because that's the answer that we're looking for. But one, I think that we allow ourselves to go through whatever those cycles of grief are, whatever those cycles of democratic grief are. And one of those cycles is denial, right? And I think denial is, in this framework, it is our inability or unwillingness to participate in the process as it is, right? And maybe we ought to be able to say, as a Black faith community, which is diverse within itself. I mean, all Black folk ain't Christians, right? So when you
Absolutely.
talk about multi-faith, Black folk are multi-faith in a lot of ways, and we got to be honest about
Absolutely.
it. And not
Absolutely.
honest about it. We have to appreciate that, right?
Absolutely.
I've learned so much from Black Buddhists that have
Mhm.
enriched my life in ways that I can celebrate alongside the way Black church mothers have
Mhm.
enriched my life. But we, as the faith community, maybe it's time for us to create the spaces where people
Mhm.
can not feel made to feel guilty when they did not participate in the democratic process because they did not go to vote. How about we hold listening sessions so that we can hear why people are not going to vote, and then talk with them, walk with them through whatever they say they need. And many of us probably don't know what we need, but let's hear what we say we need in order for us to re-engage the process, right? The same way I would never tell a grieving mother, it's time for you to get out of bed. You've been sleeping too long. It's the same way we have to be able to treat our sisters and brothers and our non-gendered
Mhm.
identifying siblings in ways that say, I get it, I understand it. How can I journey with you? Faith communities have to be able to show up with people in that way. I think another way we heal from democratic grief is by retesting the process, engaging the process, giving ourselves the space to try it again. That's what we do in any other form of grief.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how long I'll be able to make it out of bed, out of the house today, but I'm going to try it. I don't know if it's the right week to go back to work, but I'm going to try. Test it. Give yourself space to test the process. Name all the things that are harmful about the process, the things that have disillusioned you about the process, but also give yourself a chance to try it again. And then the other way I say, and just for the sake of brevity, I say it, is stay committed to something that you value. Find something that you value in the public square, particularly in the areas of justice, and stay committed to those things. There is that, and the work itself nourishes you. Jesus is, I'm a Christian, obviously, and Jesus is sitting on that well after talking to the woman who runs into town. That's the woman who runs into town, saying, "Come see a man." Right?
See
When
a
the
man.
disciples come back, Jesus is hungry. He's obviously thirsty too. The disciples come back and they ask Jesus, "Did you have anything to eat?" Jesus says, "My meat is to do the will of God." I sometimes doing the work is actually healing and nourishing too, alongside naps, alongside alongside dates, alongside intimacy with your partner. Doing the work is nourishing too. There's a story told, and I'm done with this. There's a story told that Dr. King often told of Sister Pollard from the Montgomery movement.
Yeah.
That 381 days when Black folk didn't get on buses, they walked to work, carpool to work, found other ways to church and to school. They didn't get on the public bus. What an inconvenience that was to them. But for 381 days, they sustained it to the point that the bus boycott almost bankrupted the entire company. Like, think about it. Anecdotally, I was told that Black folk could have bought the bus. That I was told that a few churches, Dexter and a few other churches, could have pooled money together and bought the entire bus company. That's how much they disrupted that system that was denying them. But there's a story told of Sister Pollard. Sister Pollard, one day toward the end of the bus boycott, she 71 years old, walking to work. 71 years old, not getting on the bus. 71 years old, nobody to take her anywhere, but she walked where she needed to go. Story says that the bus driver passed by, opened the door, and said, "Don't you want to get on this bus?" She said, "No, I don't." He said, "Come on, I know your feet could use a ride." She said, "No, I don't want to go." He pulls off, stops, backs up, opens the bus door again, and looks at Sister Pollard and says, "I know your feet are tired. Don't you want to just get on this bus?" And she said, "My feet are tired, but my soul is rested." Right? Doing the work is healing within itself, alongside naps, alongside vacation, alongside all those other things that feed us. We can heal from democratic grief if we find something we value and pour ourselves into it. Because when our feet are tired, our soul is still resting.
Man, thank you so much. That is right on point. What I'm hearing you say is create an atmosphere that does not promote harm. And the last part of your presentation talked about love, and we know that the scriptures say, by this shall all men know that ye are my disciples if we have love for one another. And so the premise in what we do should be founded in that love. And so again, Pastor Willie Dwayne Francois, thank you so much for stopping by and giving us this wealth of information. It is our prayer that everything that you are working for, setting up in your own prayer time, that you will find it to be realized in your walk and your journey, as well as your congregation and family. It's in this that we send prayer for strength and power to you as you continue. Thank you so much for dropping by.
Thank you so much for having me. Blessings.